So today we're going to take a look at Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle. And what a wonderful novel this is. It's labelled as science fiction on my particular copy that I've got here, but it really is a piece of satirical postmodern literature. But I think it will definitely appeal to a lot of science fiction readers. It has all the elements of what makes a great science fiction book a good science fiction book. So I don't think you'll be disappointed if you're to have a go at this one. So the story follows this guy called Jonah or John, and he's a bit of an unreliable narrator because he sort of refers to himself as John, but then he calls himself Jonah, and then he never mentions his name again. So it's got a bit of unreliable narration going on here. But what we find is that he's writing a book on the creator of the atomic bomb, the fictional creator of the atomic bomb, and this guy called Felix Koeniger. So in doing so, he starts to interview the children of Felix Koeniger, and he soon realizes that Koeniger also invented another life-threatening or, apocalyptic sort of weapon in a substance called Ice-9. And what this Ice-9 is, it's basically some kind of liquid, it appears to be, that has got a lower boiling point than water, I think it was. But anyway, the net effect is that if this Ice-9 hits a body of water, it instantaneously turns that body of water into ice, into this Ice-9. And every adjacent water, or any water that it comes into contact with, will literally in nanoseconds be turned to ice. And the creator, Koeniger, sort of realizes this right up front, right on early, and realizes that, he's a father of doom, right? And it also has some pretty dire consequences, not only to the planet, obviously, but to humans as well, because if you were to rub Ice-9 onto your lips or onto your eyes, it would instantly turn you into ice, and you would obviously die from that. Very dangerous sort of substance that Koeniger has built here. And it's sort of interesting because this novel was written in 1962, 63 it was released, and it goes right into that, Cuban Missile Crisis, the threat of the Cold War, threat of mutually assured destruction, right? So it was written right in that era, and we have this Ice-9 really speaking on behalf of atomic weapons, right? So I thought that bit was really interesting in the novel. So his research ultimately takes him to this island in the Caribbean, this fictional island called San Lorenzo. And on San Lorenzo, he meets up with some prominent people on the island, and he's handed this guidebook. And this guidebook is really a series of songs and poems of the Bocanism way of life, so this religion, and the whole island is completely taken by Bocanism, and it's really just a really nihilistic satirical view of religion. But for some reason, and it's made evident in the novel, but I won't spoil it for you, but the people of the island are taken to this religion, and everyone is pretty much a Bocanism. And there's talk that if anyone practices Bocanism, they're given the hook or the hookya, basically they're impaled on this massive hook. But anyway, there's a whole lot of really interesting stuff that happens in regards to religion on the island. But while it's there, the novel sort of comes to its crescendo. A whole lot of stuff happens there on the island, and I'll leave you to read the book to see exactly what goes on there. So I found it to be a wonderful novel that hooked me straight away. So what I tend to do when I want to pick up a new book, I had a couple of days where I just wanted to get a quick short book in whilst I'm in the middle of some pretty large books at the moment that I'm reading. I'm reading two rather chunky novels at the moment. And I wanted to give myself a bit of a break and say, let me just knock over just a real quick short read. And I started looking on the bench behind me here, started picking up a couple of short books to see whether or not it sort of appealed to me. And I picked up a few and I thought, I don't feel like this today. And I picked up Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle, and it literally had me on the very first sentence, the chapter title. And I read that, I thought, that sounds interesting. So I started reading the first one or two paragraphs and I was completely hooked. So I found it to be a very enjoyable read from start to finish, all the way through. I found it to be very well written and just very captivating. I saw some reviews online post me reading this novel because, even on the back here says that, it's with chill, deadpan humour, the author spatters the targets of religion and science and the hunt for the three children of Dr. Felix Koeniger. But, you know, it really is dark humor. And honestly, I didn't find myself smiling or laughing in any aspects of the book. So I wouldn't say it's humorous. It's definitely dark humor. And I can see what is meant by the, you know, little blurb on the back here. But yeah, look, I didn't even find it that so much as satirical. So I think I know, for me, there's a bit of a difference there. But it's a wonderful novel. So what did I like? Look, like I said, it had me captivated from the very first sentence. I thought from the very first sentence right through to the last, it was completely captivating and very well written. I really enjoyed Kurt Vonnegut's writing. I have read Slaughterhouse 5. It's been years ago, so I wouldn't mind rereading it now that I've read Cat's Cradle, because he really is a wonderful writer. So I really enjoyed the made-up religion in Cat's Cradle in the form of Bocanism. I like the way it was written in, you know, this sort of poetic song format, and I think all the extracts, I'm pretty sure every single time there was mention of Bocanism, it was to do with you know, a song or a poem straight out of Bocanism. So I did enjoy that. Also, like the rituals that they had, that they have this weird soul, as in the foot, the sole of your foot, soul rubbing ritual that I sort of found fascinating, and also like some of the terms that they came up with, things like caress, and what was the other one? I've got it written down here, dupras. So caress is like cosmically significant linking between individuals, and dupras was a two-person caress, right? So I did like those little, and FOMO, like harmless truths, right? FOMO is a harmless truths, and I'm sure that's come into colloquial language as well, because I'm sure I've heard people say, oh, FOMO, which comes straight out of Cat's Cradle. So I did enjoy the religious symbolisms. I enjoyed the poet and the rituals of the religion. And in many ways, what I also enjoyed as well, right? So this book was written in 1962 during the the Cuban Missile Crisis, and during the Cold War, and it really and in many ways, it's an allegory to that, right? It's an allegory to what was happening at the time in the Caribbean. So I did sort of like the link to history in this sort of fictional alternate universe in many ways, right? So I did sort of enjoy that tie-in back to the Cuban Missile Crisis and what was happening at the time. So one of the things I mentioned in the past, when reading science fiction novels, I like to put myself in the author's shoes. And so how I do that is I tend to, you know, do a bit of a Google and find out, well, what happened in 1962? What happened in 1963? You know, things that may have influenced the author in writing this novel. And I always find that really brings an extra level of satisfaction for me, because when I started looking through this novel, and the things that I enjoyed is that ironic, morbid humor, right? Because when you put yourself in this Cold War setting, you put yourself in this, you know, in the middle of a Cuban Missile Crisis, and you see some of the morbid sort of humor going on in the novel, the dark humor, you can sort of really appreciate what's going on, and there's a deeper hidden truths in a lot of that sort of sarcasm that you see in the novel. So I really did enjoy that aspect of it when in the shoes of Kurt Vonnegut and a person of the times, right? So I found that to be really entertaining and very thought-provoking as well. So what didn't I like in the novel? Look, right from the very onset, there's some really strange language and views on people with dwarfism. So I don't know, I sort of found that as pretty inappropriate. And I'm not quite sure why it had to be that way. It was just bizarre. I'll leave you to read the novel for what it is. But I don't know, at times I found it a little bit disrespectful. And not just a little bit, I found it to be pretty disrespectful. I just didn't really understand why it was like that. I just didn't understand why it had to be there at all. So I didn't sort of enjoy that aspect of it. And, you know, in the past, I've sort of criticized books, you know, and I can sort of see why the author may have done those things to provoke some kind of response, or because of the times, or just because they're complete misogynists, or whatever the case may be, right? But I really couldn't quite understand why the language was the way it was when it came to describing people with dwarfism. I don't know, I just found it a bit sad, really. It was a bit sad. Let's just leave it at that. I just thought it was not required. And if you have a different view, I'd love to hear your view, because I just couldn't understand why it had to be in there. Not so much the characters with dwarfism, but why the sort of negative point of view. I just didn't quite get that. I may have missed something, but I don't know. I just felt it a bit sad. I just felt sad reading through it, to be honest. Yeah, look, it is labelled a science fiction, a humour novel, but I really stress, I didn't. There is science fiction definitely in there. We're talking about alternate timelines in many ways. We're talking about alternate history. We're talking about, weapons of mass destruction that don't exist or probably never will exist, and potential apocalyptic events, right? So yeah, look, it's definitely science fiction. I can see why it's rated science fiction, but I sort of struggled with the humor parts of it. I found it to be satirical, like I mentioned a couple of times now, more than humorous. But I don't know, maybe that's just the way my Aussie mind works, and you may find it different. I'd love to hear from you on that. So recommendations. Look, I found Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle to be a wonderful piece of satirical postmodern literature. It is an absolutely wonderful book. I really enjoyed it, right? And it is definitely science fiction as well. So you're getting the best of both worlds. I actually forgot to mention, this novel actually was nominated for the Hugo Award. I think it was 62 or 63. I can't recall if it was actually shortlisted, but it was definitely a nominee. So it has got the attention of science fiction people, right? So don't dismiss it as a science fiction novel, because it definitely is got all the elements of one. So look, highly recommended, so much so that I'm wanting to read Slaughterhouse-Five again. Now, I haven't read any other Kurt Vonnegut novels, so if you can recommend another, this was my first reading of Cat's Cradle. I really liked Slaughterhouse-Five, I remember at the time. So if there's others that you would recommend, I'd love to hear your comment below, because I'd definitely like to have another go at Kurt Vonnegut. So yeah, highly recommended. I don't think you'll be disappointed. It's a very quick, fast read. If you like your books with a bit of satirical religion thrown in, then this is a fantastic book for that. I'd rate it a good, 3.8 out of 5. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Hey, I've been Peter. It's been the Sci-Fi Shed. And like always, I'll see you next time in the shed.